The prospects for the Asia-Pacific in 2014 are still for sustained economic growth, supported in particular by the recovery of the US economy and the rebound that we're seeing in Europe. Also, we expect China to continue to grow at around 8% in 2014, which is also very important for the rest of emerging Asia, because China has become an increasingly important trade partner. And with the Japanese economy, which is the third largest in the world, also continuing to expand at a pace of around 2% due to Abenomics, the overall external environment for emerging Asia still remains supportive. One of the major positive developments that we expect in 2014 is that the external demand environment will support gradually improving export momentum in emerging Asia. Although we expect the Asia-Pacific region to show sustained economic growth in 2014, there are a number of key downside risks to the outlook. One of the biggest risks that the emerging Asian economies are facing is that the Chinese economy could have a sharper slowdown than in our central case scenario. There are signs of imbalances in the Chinese economy, and should these start to unwind and become a serious problem for Chinese economic growth, this would have very significant negative transmission effects to emerging Asia, because over the last decade, emerging Asian countries have become increasingly dependent on China as an export market and as a source of investment. But there are also other downside risks. If the US recovery should falter and the momentum of the US recovery is not as strong as our central case expectations, perhaps due to the impact of Fed tapering, that would also be a significant negative effect on the recovery that we're anticipating in the Asian exports, which is a very important support for the 2014 year. Another important downside risk is the Eurozone, that the recovery in Europe is still very fragile. Europe remains a very important export market for emerging Asia, and if the EU recovery falters, this would also become an important downside risk. And of course, the backdrop to the whole outlook for Asia this year is affected by the prospects for global liquidity due to the impact of Fed tapering and what that means for Asia. And we've already seen a lot of shockwaves in Asian financial markets in anticipation of Fed tapering during the course of 2014. One of the key risks for the 2014 year is the potential impact of Fed tapering on Asian emerging markets. This clearly has already been a significant source of turbulence for many Asian emerging markets. We've seen large depreciations in some of the Asian emerging market currencies, and also various episodes of turbulence in Asian stock markets and bond markets. So I think a lot will depend on the progress of Fed tapering through the course of the year. The impact on different emerging Asian economies will differ because the vulnerability of emerging markets to Fed tapering also depends on their own domestic macroeconomic policy settings. Some of the most fragile economies that we've seen globally amongst the emerging markets have been those with very large current account deficits or fiscal deficits or other significant sources of macroeconomic weakness. And in the Asia-Pacific region, financial investors are particularly focused on India and Indonesia amongst the large emerging Asian economies, because both these countries have external account vulnerability. The Indian external account deficit is a major source of concern. Indonesia's is not yet to that size, but nevertheless, investors are also worried about the widening trade deficit in Indonesia over the last 18 months, and also that their foreign exchange reserves are on the moderate side. So this is why we're seeing both the Indian rupee and the Indonesian rupiah have been amongst the most vulnerable of the emerging market currencies. In contrast, some of the stronger economies in Asia, such as South Korea, have been relatively unaffected, with the won actually appreciating against the US dollar. But I think in the year ahead, we will continue to see considerable fragility in Asian emerging markets, particularly against the US dollar. We should expect to see some of the weaker currencies experience further turmoil.